Welcome, everyone. My name is Shantha. I'm a research associate and the host of the Monsoon Academy podcast, where we interview people from a variety of industries across the sustainability landscape to give early career professionals and students insight into the many avenues there are to work on solving climate change. For anyone who is new to this series, Talking About Transitions features critical conversations on systemic transitions at the interplay of technology, society, and sustainability. On the topic of this conversation, we're going to talk about green employment and what potential it has for India. India, as a rapidly developing nation, is grappling with the dual challenges of economic growth and climate change. While the country has made significant strides in renewable energy adoption, upskilling and reskilling the existing workforce, creating green jobs, all of this is essential for a just and equitable transition. Green jobs are any jobs that are decent jobs contributing to preserving or restoring the environment, whether in traditional sectors such as manufacturing and construction, or in emerging green sectors like renewable energy. India has set some very ambitious targets to build a sustainable economy aiming to reach net zero emissions by 2070. According to some projections, India's green goals will create 35 million new jobs by 2047 across the traditional and emerging sectors, including renewable energy, waste management, EVs, green construction, sustainable textiles, which means we need to upskill our population very quickly to take on these roles. The government has taken some proactive steps through the Skill Council for Green Jobs and the Green Skill Development Program, which have trained 1 million individuals in fields ranging from pollution monitoring to renewable energy management to mangrove conservation. However, less than 10% of India's youth have actually received any formal or informal training in green skills in particular. So this is a great opportunity to address youth unemployment as well. Training the youth of the country in green skills so they can get green jobs will address both these issues and improve India's ability to tackle the climate crisis. This particular dialogue aims to explore possible approaches to achieving these two twin objectives. How can we direct the unemployed youth, especially from low and middle income backgrounds, towards green jobs? What are the obstacles in transitioning to green jobs from a non-green job? And how can the government and civil society institutions come together to ease that transition? Before I introduce the speakers, some quick house rules. We always keep about 10 minutes at the end for audience questions, so please drop them in the chat if you have them during the conversation. Some questions are pre-prepared. But yeah, aside from that, we'll hope to address as many as we can at the end. Today, I have the pleasure of having two really wonderful panelists to speak to us today and answer some of those questions. The first is Raisha Galib, who leads resilience building initiatives at Climate Asia, where she works at the intersection of climate action and community development. She specializes in strengthening climate resilience among civil society organizations in rural India, with a particular focus on co-creating sustainable, culturally relevant solutions with marginalized communities. At Climate Asia, she also supports the EquiLead initiative, which promotes gender-inclusive workplaces in the climate sector through tailored interventions. Prior to Climate Asia, Raisha served as a senior program manager at Teach for India, where she led strategy and operations for their regional program and was also a Teach for India fellow. This background in education and community engagement informs her current approach to building capacity for climate action. A graduate of Lady Shri Ram College, Raisha is passionate about driving equitable and sustainable change and welcoming collaboration opportunities that align with her mission. Our second speaker is Rwitwika Bhattacharya, who is the CEO and founder of Swaniti Initiative, a social enterprise that focuses on ecosystem building to deliver on large-scale energy transitions to the last-mile communities. She holds a master's in public policy from Harvard's Kennedy School and has previously worked at the World Bank, UNFPA, and FICCI. Recognized for her impact, she's been featured in Forbes India's 30 Under 30 and Fortune India's 40 Under 40, and is a young global leader at the World Economic Forum. Rwitwika is also an author of books on governance and development, including What Makes a Politician. Thank you both for speaking to us today, and I'm really thrilled to kick off this conversation with my first question and jump right in. And this is for both panelists. What do you think are the broad challenges that India currently faces when it comes to green employment? What are the most critical skill gaps that need to be addressed to ensure a smooth transition? Whoever wants to.
Yeah, do you have a preference on who goes first?
Please go ahead.
Okay, I'll go ahead then. Thank you for that, and thank you so much for having me here today. I'm excited to speak, especially from like a youth perspective and employment perspective. So just to set some context, if you look at India's solar targets alone, and if you look at what India is aiming for in the next 10 to 15 years, it's quite ambitious by way of what is expected from the larger ecosystem. And in terms of the ambition will require not just a technological breakthrough, but the people to support it. So even if you look at it, let's go down one more granular level. If you could look at it from a state level, you have states who have gone ahead and made really ambitious announcements in terms of net zero targets. You have states like Maharashtra who are creating large solar feeders. And what's fascinating is that the people to maintain and install these solar ecosystems is very limited. So even like at a very fundamental level of people with base skills, is there's major limitation. The more you kind of go up that hierarchy, the more kind of gaps there are in being able to figure out R&D, in being able to figure out how do you run manufacturing units, in being able to really sustain and move forward in breakthrough in cheaper technologies. Battery storage is becoming a major kind of point of conversation within states. And if you look at battery storage manufacturing units, there are not enough for India to be able to sustain the momentum that is there on energy transition. And one of the major issues around that is the gap that exists from a talent and a personnel capacity. So, to your point, Shanta, I think when it comes to the gaps that exist, there are gaps in terms of gaps, and I'd actually look at it from the flip side, opportunities on every rung of the kind of renewable technology piece. Everything from like being able to find good researchers, being able to find good managers, to all the way down to kind of folks who can help maintain these kind of renewable technologies of solar, wind, hydro. I picked on solar because that is the biggest targets that we have. But when it comes down to each rung, that's certainly there. But I think the other side, which is also there, is being able to find the right courses and being able to find the right opportunities. One point before I turn to Raisha, which is that if you look at employment within the industry which is happening, you'll notice that a lot of people who are getting employed are folks who already have skills in this ecosystem going into other jobs which are there. And Swaniti did a major study on this, which is how I'm able to speak to it. And the fact that while new jobs are being created, the new jobs are becoming problematic because there's not enough people with, let's say, an electrical engineering background who can go in and be able to take on those new jobs, or have experiences in being able to kind of work in other renewable maintenance or even kind of more conventional technology maintenance issues. So there is, while there's an opportunity, there needs to also be the space and kind of the mindful career growth and career trajectory of saying we want to go ahead and build a capacity in renewable technologies, particularly in solar or in hydro or in wind or geothermal, whatever it is. um, be able to kind of mindfully work in that direction, so that the true kind of sense of saying that these new jobs exist and we're able to take on these new jobs with the requisite skill does happen in due course. So just a couple of very high level points, and happy as the conversation moves forward to drill down into the specifics.
Over to you, Raisha.
Yeah, Rwitwika, thank you for that very wonderful start. I think you've summarized it so well. And thanks for taking us through like the different layers of where support is required. I think when you're talking about green skills, couple of things, Shanta, you also mentioned that I think India has set a rather ambitious target for itself, like creating 35 million green jobs by 2047. Even if we look at the latest green skills report, I think in a year itself, 2003 to 2004, like the demand for green skills has almost doubled. But like Ritvika said, right, the just we're not being able to meet that demand right now because of multiple challenges. If you're focusing particularly on India, like the good thing is there are many vocational institutes and technical training centers that offer this kind of support. But I think a big problem there is it available in every state? Is it available in every language? What is the digital infrastructure set up for to ensure more accessibility is a huge question mark. I think if you're talking to anyone in the urban setup, they must have heard about climate positive jobs, but they're not very clear about the skill building programs or even the different kind of green skills that exist. So there are green skills is one big bucket. There are also green intersection skills, right? I think a little bit of what Ritvika touched upon is we are struggling to find people in research, we are struggling to find people in tech. But if you're looking at green intersection skills, these not only revolve around asking for an expertise, for example, in renewable energy, conservation, climate modeling, but they're also asking for people who have product management, program management, product development expertise to come in. So at a very basic level, I think there is also an awareness gap of where people can contribute to the green ecosystem and the green economy. One is that. And the second thing, I think, lack of awareness about these existing programs, but also policy and funding gaps. And again, very high level points. I think while the government initiatives like the Skill Council for Green Jobs exist, they have not been scaled up sufficiently to meet the kind of demand that's being generated. I think MNRE also runs a green skill development program, and its focus is to reach rural areas and disadvantaged groups. But like an example from that is their project on training rural women as solar engineers had shown a lot of promise, but it does require a lot more screening up if you're looking at enabling the entire rural rural system and also building climate resilience in the rural space. So yeah, just a few thoughts around what the existing challenges can be, and happy to take up any follow-up questions that come up.
I think it's really interesting that some of the things that you're mentioning are broader issues with the Indian education system as well in general, about people not being aware about the type of jobs that are available, about do we have the digital infrastructure to train people across the board? Are they available in every state and every language? I think that diversity has been not an issue and an opportunity. I guess it's both, whether in the regular employment industry or this new one. So that's, I guess, one of the major issues is if we haven't figured it out yet, generally in the education space, then how will we scale it up for green education, if you want to call it that as well? So that is very interesting. So I'll move from here to this demand and supply problem, right? So Raisha, in your work in climate resilience building, and you've worked with rural communities particularly, are there any gaps or opportunities that can be addressed by green jobs? So for example, with the rural women engineering program that you've kind of talked about already, what are the benefits and what are the barriers currently that are preventing this from having a wholesale benefit to everyone?
Yeah, I'm going to answer your question, but I'm going to talk a little bit about Climate Asia, what Climate Asia does, and what our program is, because I think it's a great platform to talk about it. We'll take just 30 seconds for it. I think this also helps set context because we run capacity building programs for CSOs working in the grassroots who support small scale farmers. So we don't directly work with the small scale farmers, but we build capacity of organizations who have been working for 25, 30 years. So they have a lot of locally source knowledge. They lead a lot of locally sourced climate adaptation practices. But I think the problem there is they really struggle to, definitely struggle to scale their solutions. At the same time, they also do not have very dedicated learning and development systems. Oh, sorry, someone's speaking up. Can I continue?
Yes,
Is it
please.
okay for me to continue? Okay.
Yeah, please go ahead.
All right. So one is, I think there's a lack of awareness of how someone can build a skill while someone is in an organization. Like for instance, yes, green skills, you take a training, you take a course, you learn what green skills are, you upskill yourself. You also learn a significant amount of skills while on the job. And I think an opportunity there, and it might be a really niche opportunity, but an opportunity there, I think, exists in just creating L&D systems that teach people while they're on the job. Because I think a lot of practice or skills that they're picking up is through doing the work. But if there is a dedicated system in place to teach it, I think we can reach so many more people. And that's one of the opportunities we saw while we were running our program. I think the people we interacted with, I think why they were not getting the similar platform was they don't speak the same language, they don't have the same vocabulary as many people who are talking or advocating about these things too. But I feel like any kind of learning intervention that helps these organizations build their L&D systems to teach green skills on the job, that might be a great idea to just follow. The second thing where there is an opportunity for us to create more green jobs, I think the DRE sector, the decentralized renewable energy sector, also offers a lot of potential for job creation in rural areas, especially like through installation, maintenance, operations of small scale, like solar or wind projects. So that is one bucket. The other piece that we are also exploring through our accelerator is climate smart agriculture. Like, can we look at climate agriculture innovations and can green jobs be created by integrating sustainable agricultural practices? The third thing which we haven't explored, but this is an idea we keep thinking about, is can we also encourage local entrepreneurship in green sectors, especially like women-led solar initiatives, the previous point that I was talking about. But I think one of the major barriers we also see, one is language barriers we already talked about, right? Just training resources, people walking in with capacity building programs. Ek to, like there is no dearth of capacity building programs in the country. Everyone's running a capacity building program, but people who are designing these programs are not people who are facing the problem. So I think the biggest barrier is there, right? Like, how do we truly understand the problem to solve it? But the second thing is when we are even walking in with these capacity building programs, it's catered to a certain section of a population who can speak the same language, who have the technical know-how to even get that kind of knowledge. So are we catering or like designing our capacity building programs to fit the context of the population that we are serving is one. The second thing that we like our program, when I say we, I mean these are all the mistakes we made along the way. Our program completely overlooked was just basic digital literacy and infrastructure for these programs to run. So there might be a strong intent to teach green skills, advocate for them, or really get people enrolled in the program. But does the region have the basic digital infrastructure to access these programs? Is the other question to like kind of think about.
So in a similar, thank you for that answer. And yeah, I think it was also good to understand a little bit more about what you're thinking at Climate Asia going into it. So similar vein, I wanted to ask Rwitwika the same question about demand and supply, but through your experience with Swaniti, because that's almost exactly what you're doing, is building these capacities at that scale and trying to figure out, so what is the scale at which green jobs are required in order to deliver the large scale energy transformation, especially for the last mile communities that you work with? And what is the scope for, say, public-private partnerships to play a role in accelerating that creation of green jobs, upskilling that workforce? And also, if you have any comments on my previous question as well, please feel free to add those in. I can repeat myself if need be.
Great, thank you for that, Shantha, and thank you, Raisha. I think you covered a lot of really strong bases on the current ecosystem. So in terms of, Raisha, I'll take a page from your book. In terms of what Swaniti does, we work on last mile delivery. What that means is that we actually work in really rural communities across India to look at what are the government programs around climate and sustainability, which are not effectively reaching the beneficiary or the target constituent. And essentially, our work then becomes into identifying why that isn't happening and working with the local administration or the state government in overcoming that gap. In that context, if you look at skilling, skilling has been a bane in India's work for a while. It's not that we have a dearth of resources, but our deployment systems for those skilling pieces do struggle. So again, going back to the fact that we recently just finished a report on green skilling. One of the things that we grappled with was that the current skilling ecosystem is not designed to be able to cater to such a large scale transition. And the basis of this statement is that historically we have not had skilling really work as a major success in any particular sector. Part of that is because skilling does not translate to employability in most cases. We skill people, but then they are essentially not as employable. And part of that, again, I think Raisha wonderfully articulated it, is because if you look at the kind of hands-on experiences that you need, if you look at the apprenticeship components of how skilling today works, it doesn't kind of cater itself where we have ITIs who skill, or we have a Surya Mitra program, which is a 3-month residential training program for rural India. It doesn't necessarily translate to now me getting a job in a solar sector, and has not been doing so in the recent past. Granted, these are new interventions. Shanta, I like your framing because you talked about public-private partnership, and I think that's the key piece of how things can work. Is that in a public-private partnership, essentially, what we need is for industry and for academia to step up. So for industry to step up, because industry, unlike any other, can really kind of tell you what they need. And when I say industry, I'm not talking about like Tata Power, for example. These are the larger industries have the capability and are setting up centers of excellence across India. For example, they have set up or committed to setting up a center of excellence for training around renewables in Telangana. I'm talking about the MSMEs. And if you look at most of the MSME feedback which is coming in, who will end up being the largest employer in the renewable sector, there has neither been the pipeline or the platform or the task force to take their feedback on what right now skilling should look like. Neither has been that organizing from the other side to really say this is the extent of our gap and what we need. So one of the models that has previously worked in some specific countries and that is worth looking into is, for example, can there be some sort of subsidization for MSMEs to train people, right? And with the commitment that MSMEs will place people for a stipulated time period, and you can create those checks and balances on how long that time period is and how effective that placement is. But that's one piece to consider in terms of public-private partnership. The other piece, which has always kind of consistently been interesting, is to seed fund entrepreneurs across India on these specific tasks. And some very kind of bold capital firms have started to do this now. Is to look at how do you create entrepreneurs at a grassroots level. And then I think the third is to kind of look at within the academia, especially for more complex roles like research and development, can you partner with academia to be able to strengthen their curriculum and the way that they have hands-on research which is taking place? Which again, if you go up the hierarchy, the need for that is going to end up becoming more and more. And instead of poaching either from other sectors or internationally, we have this space to develop new talent as long as we have the buy-in and the support and the funding available for academic institutions like the IITs of the world. So I think those are three immediate pieces of thoughts that I have on the public-private partnership. All of this is to say that we can't scratch ITIs completely either, but we can't be reliable conventionally only on them. There has to be a mixed model where there has to be an equal reliance on government as well as industry to be able to enable this transition. The need right now is more methodical thinking of which rung and how and who are we trying to reach. We also need to, and again, I'll take the example of Indonesia. We're doing a case study on Indonesia's EV sector, and we're looking at how that sector is growing. And one thing worth learning for India from an Indonesia context is that they're taking a lot of talent from the ICE vehicles. And so they're essentially saying, hey, you've already done this for ICE vehicles. Can you now come do this for EV? Or they're taking in talent from kind of in the international market. And it's again because they're trying to build this ecosystem, but the talent right now is not necessarily there at the skill that it needs to be. I do think that there are overlaps between India and Indonesia by way of talent. And by way of our desire to also bring in talent from overseas, because there's not as much as is required in the Indian ecosystem, which is unfortunate because I don't think we have a dearth of raw talent. I think we need to now hone it and grow it and get to that point.
Thank you so much. I want to take this opportunity to just summarize a little bit of what you all said, because I think we got some really, we've got a really good picture of what exactly we're dealing with at this point. So one is the fact that there's generally an awareness gap. So we have the raw talent, but there's people who either don't know where to go or can't find the right places to get trained in the diverse range of green skills that are needed. So the first thing to do would be to figure out how we're going to capacity build in local context, local languages. And then the other big problem is that skilling isn't translating necessarily to employability. So even if we're skilling people en masse, they're not able to get those jobs. And as far as solutions go, I think we got a great range from kind of seeding local entrepreneurs to encourage them to take up green jobs and I guess in that sense, they would be able to skill themselves for their local context and what they need for their businesses to grow, which brings us also to Rwitwika's point and Raisha's together that MSME subsidies, training and hiring, allowing smaller enterprises to grow their green skilled workers. And then we have climate smart agriculture and improving basically how learning and development on the job can go as well. I think it's really interesting that you mentioned the rungs. So trying to figure out which rungs have to be trained first. And I wanted to know if either of you had any thoughts on that before we move on to the scheduled questions, just in case you do.
Happy to elaborate on that in case that's helpful. So I think in terms of rungs, if you look at it, there are kind of three pieces that broadly come out in. Again, I'm taking the example of solar and EV particularly because those are where we've done studies and have more insight into. The first is kind of again the I would say the floor worker kind of piece where you're looking at more. I would say again to take Raisha's point, more of like a new talent where you can really kind of capitalize on non-urban folks coming in. Not that you need to, but there is a possibility of bringing in new talent, and this is, to my mind, perhaps the lowest hanging fruit in terms of new jobs created. Also, because again, if you look at the example of EV, you might have 10 people. The ratios are probably 10 people on roles like R&D and development and management, and then you have about 400 floor workers. So in terms of scale and being able to work in that, the possibility of scale is really large. And being able to see new industries and bring in new folks, that's where I'd say the opportunity is. When it comes to kind of more, you know, complex jobs which require more advanced degrees and more years of work experience, I think it's again going into the more managerial and the more R&D roles. And I think Raisha, you mentioned this point in terms of just like being focused on building a career in those spaces and also having academic institutions and having not just degrees, but then those initial jobs focused in these areas. That's where I think there is the opportunity to really kind of exponentially boom in your career path, because the next 10 to 15 years, while we've kind of solved one piece of the puzzle in cheap solar panels now being available, we have not solved the piece of the puzzle around battery storage being available. We have not solved the puzzle around geothermal exploration being cost effective enough where you can actually recover your cost within a stipulated time period. We've not hit like, hydro and wind to scale that we want to. And I know there's increasing conversations around nuclear. We scratched the surface on nuclear and what that means. So both by way of market opportunity for young people, uh, there will be a major boom because this transition is now here to stay. And the question becomes that as we're in the precipice of what I think is the next major energy transition, how are we able to really capitalize and hone the talent that we have? And so in terms of the hierarchy, that kind of being able to bring in talent at a research and development level and being able to kind of really begin to nurture the leaders in this space, not leaders who've come in from conventional energy, but those who are young and have a fresh lens and have been exposed to this, is just a remarkable opportunity that is waiting to be tapped into.
Thank you. Raisha, do you have any thoughts you can add? Oh, yeah. Okay, cool. So our next question, I wanted to bring in that equity lens since I know that both of you have a lot to say on or have worked a lot in this field. So for you, Raisha, I was reading that men make up 85% of all the candidates who have undergone green skills training, and this is according to the Skill Council for Green Jobs data. So what do you think, what role do you think gender plays in the Indian green jobs market, and how can we address that?
I was most nervous about this question because how can we address that? It's so tough to crack.
It's
Um,
definitely a heavy question, and I don't expect you to have like a you already figured it out type of answer.
yeah, no, I can mostly just share what we figured out and learned through the all the mistakes that we've made so far. But I think like overall, and I was just like in preparation for this call, I was reading a couple of reports, and I think some like a statistic that really stood out to me was how like men um like the percentage of men in cross-functional green skills is much higher. And cross-functional green skills are skills that are needed to grow the green economy, but not directly with the green economy. So these are also include maintenance and repair work, like electrical systems, maintaining vehicles, buildings, computers, etc. And how this also creates so many more job opportunities for men than women. And I'm not saying women do not step into these fields, but if you're looking at it statistically, the number of women in these fields are relatively lower. And in terms of green jobs, like you can see women in sustainable development and sustainable education as a field. Not again, the percentage is not high, but compared to men, that is the only area where there is a higher representation of women. And obviously, like many reasons for that, right? So I think um, in our very like, and again, I'm not saying I have like a complete understanding of this field, right? Like in our limited interaction that happened through the grassroots NGOs that we were supporting, we saw a couple of reasons, causes, and solutions we can possibly explore, right? And I think the solutions again sound like it's an echo chamber because people are talking about policy level interventions, people are talking about education and training, people are talking about awareness campaigns. But I think, and I'm also trying to find a way to put it in a way that doesn't sound so I think one way to look at it is how can we break traditional structures, societal norms to help women step out, or like access jobs, opportunities that they want to. But at the other end, there might also be value in exploring like home-based opportunities that do not like and from a lens of like reducing barriers to change, right? Like I think what is going to be easier as a first step for a woman to take up in a rural economy might be a home-based opportunity, and from there we move forward, versus exposing them to an opportunity that might require that woman to jump through multiple barriers. So, and that is an area and a subject that's tricky because while I was exploring that for myself, like as an intervention for Climate Asia, I think I went through multiple layers of, but is it an intersectional feminist approach? Is it something that's going to empower, enable a woman versus am I imposing like traditional barriers on my approach is as well, right? Is my approach rooted in like forward thinking? Is it not rooted in forward thinking, etc.? But I do see value in exploring home-based approaches once. The second thing, there are a lot of community-based training centers for women for green skilling. But I think again, like something that we miss out when we are designing these community-based training centers, we have also said these will be women-led. These will have maximum women in attendance so that there is safety, etc., being taken care of. We are still not being able to crack the infrastructural access piece. Safety when it comes to transport, safety when it comes to accessing these spaces, safety when it comes to like traveling such far distances to even access these programs is the other piece. And these are just 2 points I'd like to put forward right now. Would love to hear what Rwitwika thinks as well, and then maybe we can build on the conversation.
I completely also concede your point that I think cultural barriers and what people are already used to, I don't think I agree with why you were struggling to frame it because you are not saying that we have to work with what we've got, so keep women inching forward as opposed to leaping forward. I do see that. But even in the research I've done, when they're installing new solar panels on a large scale, like the security guards are always going to be men, especially when these people have to be working at night. Also, interestingly, in Pull's work, so Transitions Research has an initiative called Pull. In our work in Panjim, we were thinking about electric buses, and one of the things that my colleague Ashali told me about was that women bus drivers for new EVs, we'd have to create new heights for the bus driver seats in order to make it accessible to the average Indian woman who is going to be slightly shorter than these like mass manufactured buses, which is such an interesting problem. I don't think any policymaker is gonna naturally think of that and say, yeah, before we order the buses, let's make sure women can drive them. But those are the kind of things we have to start thinking about if women are gonna even start to make those non-home based leaps forward. So completely agree with you on that, and I'll let Rwitwika add to it.
Thank you for that, Shantha. And thank you, Raisha. Really good number of points. This reminds me of like a study in Netherlands, which they did. And I think it was Netherlands, if memory serves me right. And they noticed that young girls stopped going to parks after a certain age. And they kind of tried to figure out why this was happening. And they noticed all the kids kind of go up to a certain age, like I think they realized it was about 9 or 10, and then suddenly, there's a drop, and a bunch of women actually got together as part of their urban planning mission to be able to figure out why that was. And they realized that the pathways to going to the path was not necessarily how women would want to travel. They realized that the bus hours operating to get to a park after it gets dark kind of reduces in areas where it's easier for women to travel. They started to realize that the kind of swings, or the proportion of like monkey bars, or the proportion of actual play space for women, for little girls, was not as good and conducive as they wanted. So the what was fascinating from that study, and from that insight, was that a lot of the decision making processes and policy making spaces continue to be taken by men. So you don't have the perspective of girls and women coming into these conversations. And I think that's the same kind of error we are falling into with women and energy transition as well. We talk a lot about women in leadership in tech, but let's look at women in leadership in renewable energies. They are representative of what you see in the workforce. And part of the reason, let's say, we focus on solar instead of biogas, which interestingly enough was something that when we went to a lot of like rural Chhattisgarh when we were doing our work, uh, women in panchayats actually proposed is, yeah, biogas kyun nahi lagte, solar kyun lag raha hai, right? We didn't think of that. We kind of went on like, the government said solar, so we're going to go down solar. But what really works for the community, what really works for women, um, I don't think we have enough decision makers, enough designers, enough conversation of women leaders coming out into what does the green jobs mean for women, what are the possibilities, and can we shift the paradigm of these kind of conventionally or stereotypically thought of as male jobs, actually not stereotypically, but historically thought of as male jobs, into what it would mean for women, and what are the gaps which are there. And I think we really need, because we are, like I said, right at the beginning of this energy transition movement, to have more women at the decision making tables to say, as we're designing this large scale shift, what is it that works for women? How is it that this works better for women? Installation, I mean, historically, like, this was something which we didn't even broach, was because they said, the materials are so heavy, how do we expect women to take them up and put them on, right? These are very physically cumbersome tasks. But then it was interesting because a few gram panchayat women said, lekin hum log maintenance kar sakte hain. But now maintenance is increasingly becoming automated. So is there a job for that? And have we really thought? So I think bringing into that gender lens is a first step in being able to even find those solutions. Right now, the space is pretty void of those lenses to begin with.
I think you've already begun to answer my question for you, but I'll ask it anyway in case there's more to it. But MNRE is supporting the decentralized and off-grid solar programming to ensure energy security, associated livelihood generation for rural and last mile communities, right? So that includes setting up solar streetlights, off-grid systems, supporting the training of rural women engineers, which Raisha already brought up in the beginning. So, in your experience, what are, aside from a lack of women decision makers, which you've already mentioned, what is the reality in terms of generating employment and benefits in rural communities? And that doesn't just have to be for women. I think we can get into it from an equity perspective also towards marginalized communities. What do they lack in order to fully benefit from the encouragement of such programs by the government?
Tasha, do you want to go ahead? I just did like a huge monologue on women. Do you want to go?
Chanda, can you just briefly repeat the question, just the last question, please, maybe? Yeah.
So, as the government is starting up all these programs, like MNRE is encouraging
Mm,
decentralized and off-grid systems, how can we ensure that that equity lens, not just for women, but for marginalized communities overall, is being kept in mind? And aside from decision-making power, which of course we can all agree on is something very
mm,
much needed, what else can we do to ensure that the benefits of these programs are getting spread out as evenly as possible amongst marginalized communities?
right, right. Um, I have a very idealistic answer, but I don't think that's going to work. But I was at a Have you heard of Haq Darshak and the work they do? Yeah. So they bridge access from welfare, like this welfare schemes to people in the community. And they were launching the state of welfare report. So I was at that event yesterday, and someone talked about this, and which was very crucial is like people who are designing, and which I think Ritvika also touched upon, Shanta, you have touched upon in multiple answers through this conversation, is people who are designing for these capacity building programs, these institutions, these curriculum, these training programs are not people affected by the problem. So it would be ideal if the people who are designing are representatives of the marginalized communities, of the communities you want to serve. But till that kind of change happens, we would need to maybe base it on a very thorough understanding of what the community needs. And I think that's the first thing that anyone who does community work learns, right? When you're walking into a community to solve a problem, you do not walk in thinking, I know better. Even if maybe like at that point you might have more like theoretical or technical knowledge, walking into a space thinking I'm going to solve this because I know better is the first mistake we make. Like last year when we ran a pilot program, I designed the program curriculum without really understanding what the community needs, and it did not work. Like most of it did not work because most of the practices they were already engaging with are the practices they knew and understood super well. So to introduce something new did not work. So first is, can we capture voices more effectively? And there is a lot of data, there is a lot of research that has happened, there's a lot of data that's happened, but this is also a gap between like practitioners and researchers. And I'm a practitioner myself, and by saying this I think I am pulling myself down. But practitioners do not like, or I as a practitioner have seen that I do not update my repertoire of learning as frequently as I should. So there is some data that comes in, and there is one angle that says, okay, this is the data I have, I'm going to create something, but am I updating it even if the region changes, even if it's one other organization, to capture voices super well? Yeah, I think that's the point that comes to mind more prominently at this moment. We'll add more later.
Sure, and thank you for that, Raisha. And just kind of adding on a bit on what Raisha's point is, I think voices is certainly one key piece of it. The other, I think, is a more systemic gap which we have, is that our planning and our design processes continue to be top down, and not in all states and not all equitably do we really create those opportunities for local solutions to be implemented and owned by local people in the same way. It's not to say that this is everywhere or this is pervasive, but West Bengal's Panchayati Raj system undoubtedly is stronger than Jharkhand's, for example. And so the point is that energy is a hyper localized issue, and energy security hits home more than anything else. But when it comes to the solutions of how we want to do it, it still suddenly becomes like a very infrastructure heavy decision making process. So getting community voices, particularly marginalized voices, becomes harder and more limited. So again, going back to that example of biogas, we heard that in not just one space, but multiple spaces saying कि biogas क्यों नहीं हम लोग लगा रहे हैं. And again, food for thought, not that that is the best solution or that that is something that needs to be acted on, but do we have the space to then take on a few clusters and communities to experiment that? And to be fair to Jharkhand, I just gave the example of panchayats there. Jharkhand is doing this through some programs. But again, where is the program coming in from? It's coming in from like a very top-down approach, both by way of funding availability as well as by way of technical assistance. A major gap that exists is once you get out of Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore, maybe Chennai, Kolkata, the technical capabilities to actually enable a lot of these transitions start to get very limited. So what I feel like, especially the conversation on inclusion and equity around energy, especially when it focused to issues on just transition, really highlight a much more systemic gap that exists in the global south. This is not a gap which is exclusive to energy security. It's a gap that exists because our systems, while solid, and in recent part in the last couple of years, I've actually traveled to a bunch of countries and really gotten thick into the governance space. India has really robust local governance systems, but we have scope for improvement. And when it comes to being able to ensure those inclusive voices, the systems, the capacity, the funding, we still have more space to be able to strengthen that.
I think one point I want to pick on a little from what you said was that you mentioned a lot of it comes down to questions of infrastructure as well. And when you're trying to do two things simultaneously, which we come through in sustainability work in general, both having localized contextual solutioning and managing to do it at scale, sometimes are at very, like, there are two different ends of one spectrum sometimes. It feels, especially with larger infrastructure projects, once you put them in place, after that, local governance can't do much to change something that's not working, if that makes sense. So if you have like a large solar panel field that's coming up, once it's come up, even if it disrupts everything, you can't pull it out of the ground and kind of restart somewhere else. So I think what you mentioned from the start, both points about having those voices play a bigger role in decision making is where we have to come in before the projects become like infrastructurally permanent as well. But I don't know if you agree or disagree, so I'll let you comment in case you do. You look like you have thoughts. No?
Right. So I think that's also like India's biggest Achilles heel as per commentators of democratic thinking is maybe we have too many consultations. Maybe we would have been a quote China had we had less consultations and less voices, right? And that's a controversial thought. But I do think there are flip sides of the same coin, but at the same time, um, I do think that there are strategic ways and well-designed ways to be able to accomplish both sides. I don't think you have to be one extreme or the other. I don't think you have to be China or you have to like go ahead and just keep doing consultations. I do think there are enough European nations who have referendums who have done it time and again and done it in a very time efficient manner where decisions are taken by a certain date. But I think that's also because, again, the energy or the climate movement is fascinating because it pulls to light, like it's almost like a ethics evaluation process or values evaluation process, because now I feel like a fundamental question for India is, are we more capitalist or are we more socialist? If we are more capitalist, then we prioritize economic growth, we prioritize the solar growing, try to bring in more industry, we try to grow more homegrown industries. Are we more socialist? Are we going to now go back into asking communities what they think? Are we going to create more socialist, more community-centric issues? So it's interesting you say this because it's almost like a point for us to look ourselves in the mirror and say, it's been so many years since independence. What have we really evolved to becoming more so? And then that reflection essentially tells us the approach that we want to take. And again, we don't have to be purely capitalist or we don't have to be purely socialist, but where on the spectrum are we now?
Raisha?
No, I just wanted to say, like, thank you for bringing in that lens. Like, when you mentioned, I know it was a controversial point to bring in, but when you talked about it in terms of ethics evaluation and are we moving, I think that was just a wonderful perspective to bring in. So thank you for doing that, Ritvik. I was waiting so that I could say that. Yeah, but this brings in a lot of just, I think, in terms of decision making. And right, like I don't think it is about one path or the other, but like whatever is most needed at this point. So yeah, this perspective was really nice to bring it all together. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and I think also like our ethics have layers to it as well. Like even if we are being ethically, we can either switch entirely to green and renewables and see where that leaves us, or we can try to continue to benefit from fossil fuels and those sort of things. So I think that that question is just so much bigger and has many layers. I would love to discuss it, but I will have to stop myself from doing that because we have about 10 minutes and I want to give some of the time to the audience questions that we have already a few of. One of them is, my question is from Himanka Kaushik. How do we define green jobs? Does the term refer exclusively to roles in hardware technology industries, MSMEs, and entrepreneurship in engineering related fields? Or does it also encompass roles in policy think tanks, academic research tied to the green economy? Which I think we've raised that issue of like the intersectional green skills that are transferable across industries. And moreover, where does a student from disciplines like social science or non-STEM backgrounds fit into this broader framework of green jobs? So
Okay.
I'll let yeah.
Yeah, I can take a shot at this because the next question I would love for Ritvika to answer. I don't have thoughts on that, so I'm going to start with this question and then let's open it up. Can I share my screen and just show a slide? I think it might get easier for Himanka to, um,
But
if you
can
can
you share?
just give
I don't
me,
think that's ever been
yeah.
asked of me before, but please try it and see what happens.
Oh, I don't think I have screen sharing there. Oh, I do. Just give me 1 second. Sorry, because we just recently took a session on this and I have the slide ready, so I thought it will just be easier um, to explain. Can you see my screen? Yeah, so Himanka, see, so green skills, and this is just like a summary slide, but overall green skills, we would see expertise in renewable energy, conservation, climate modeling, environmental law, etc., is the hardcore technical skills you're looking at. Now, there are also green intersection skills, like your expertise in research methodologies, M&E, DEI, finance, talent management. You can work in the climate spaces and climate programs if you have these skills. And then there are green adjacent skills, which are enabling skills that help climate programs. Like for instance, this would be level 1, this would be level 2, this would be another level removed. Now, like your second part of the question, asking if someone's not from a STEM degree, how do they venture into this space? Um, Now, I think so. What I do is actually green intersection skills. So I am also don't have a STEM degree. Did not study renewable energy or like climate policies, environmental law in college, but I was interested. So one piece is definitely like passion, interest, etc. And then figured out. So this slide was really helpful for me because I was also looking for an in into the climate space out of curiosity and interest. But like we talked about green skills, right? Like for someone who's not does not have a lot of green skills at the initial part of their career to move in the climate space is also rather difficult at this point because a lot of employers right now are looking for very specific green skills. So if you're at the start of the career, it's a good idea to like build your skill on that. If not, green intersection skills is also an area you can explore. Like you can think about product development or program management for climate-based programs, and program management for climate-based programs is something that I do. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. We can talk more if needed post this call, maybe.
Yeah, I think that that was really helpful, and that slide really captured the answer to the question so efficiently. So I guess we moved through that relatively quickly. So yeah, as you planned, Raisha, I'll allow Ritvika to answer the next question, but please feel free to jump in as well. Does transitioning to a green economy truly lead to net job creation, or is it primarily a redistribution of the workforce, with jobs in declining sunset sectors being replaced with opportunities in emerging sunrise sectors? In this context, is the shift genuinely additive or does it risk being a zero-sum game?
Thank you for that. And thank you for the framing of that question too. That's really well framed. So in terms of the whether it's a zero-sum game, first of all, it's too early to say right now in terms of the amount, the net amount of new jobs which will be added. I don't think there's a question on whether new jobs will be added. I certainly believe that there will be, but you really raise a very valuable point when it comes to right now the shift is coming in from more of the sunset sectors, primarily because there's more experience in how to be able to create and work with these newer technologies. That's kind of what we've increasingly found. But all of that again is to say that we're at the beginning of something very, very new, which most of us don't really know how it will shape up. And again, that is, I can give you some beautiful reality of like, we have 15 million jobs that are going to be added in the next 7 years, with 7 million of them. No, 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 none of us really know. We are all speculating. We're speculating to a great extent. And we're also speculating in terms of our availability of skill sets of what is there. And again, it goes back to a skilling piece. The question will become is are we able to create enough talent to capture this market? Are we able to respond to the need in a timely manner? And are we able to add value to what is being already produced? So the other piece of the conversation which we've kind of left out is the geopolitics, and the fact that if you look at India, I think it's like uh, uh, 3 to 4% of all the actual production of solar panels is happening in India, despite the PLI scheme being offered, and the rest is actually still continuing to come in from China, if my numbers are right. If not 3 to 4%, even if we kind of push it, what will be maximum 10%, which means that are we really creating the ecosystem for fresh new jobs? We are not there yet. Do we have the scope and the capability, and definitely the demand? Definitely we do. But again, when it comes to your question of additive or zero sum game, it will be a question of how quickly are we responding to market demands within country. Are we able to build those units? Are we able to capture battery storage? Are we able to look at wind and be able to have enough industries that will hire locally? That ecosystem is not there to the extent that we can conclude on, excuse me, how many jobs will be created. Um, and I think the next 5 years are pivotal to be able to see if we're able to take advantage of that window. The US, for example, has pumped in so much money through the Inflation Reduction Act in the last 4 years that they've ensured that local jobs are created. That the Rivian, which is a totally EV car, is produced here. And even when it comes to like critical minerals, which were historically coming in from like Africa or from East Asia, the US has pumped in money through the Inflation Reduction Act to do this as homegrown, lab-grown materials which are produced within the US. So an example of a country which also has the power of the dollar pushing those resources through is kind of the US through its inflation reduction, where they're saying there's a market coming in, an opportunity coming in, let's capitalize. Again, even with the US, that's all a question mark with the new president-elect coming in less than a month. So yeah.
I think that really does answer the question quite well, Raisha, unless you have something to add. Do I want to? Okay. So we're running up on the time, so I will quickly summarize some of what we've discussed today. Thank you to both of you for such wonderful answers. I think this discussion was great. Sorry, I see maybe there's one more question. Is there? Oh, sorry, there's one more question. How do you guys feel about time? Would you have like another 5 minutes, or do you want me to? Yes. Yes.
Okay,
Okay.
2-3 minutes, yeah.
Okay, cool. Unenthusiastically, we will answer this last question as well. It says, we have covered the role of private sector in promoting green jobs, but is there a pathway where governments can incentivize private sectors to create green jobs that target young people?
I'll just quickly jump into this. It's interesting. Last budget, Honorable Finance Minister mentioned this like apprenticeship coming out of CSRs and all. I think being able to think through such programs and saying, can we create like a particular scope for green jobs? In her budget, for the first time, she mentioned green jobs actually. So undoubtedly, the government does have green jobs on their mind. In terms of pathways, I do think it depends on where in the hierarchy you're thinking. Surya Mitra is something that the government has already pushed for with the rural demography in mind. Has there been like a full on like let's do this for even any state level of green jobs? Less so. And my gut says that it's also because this level of energy transition is also a risk to our infrastructure. We're kind of betting on things like solar will work out in the longer term and we won't have any sort of like energy security issues. But coming back to that question of green jobs, I do think that the government is inching towards that. Last budget there were a number of bold decisions, but when it comes to employable college graduate young people, I do think there's potential space to think creatively around whether this is possible through, let's say, the CSR kind of apprenticeship programs or through kind of more hands-on training opportunities.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And I will summarize what we've talked about very quickly, practically wrapping it just to, conclude. So today we were trying to get to the question of whether we can use this transition towards green jobs and a green economy to solve both this unemployment issue and this capacity building issue that India is currently facing. Some of the solutions we discussed have to do with putting funding in the right places, building the capacity in the right ways. That's localizing context, building the right digital infrastructure, making sure that it's available in languages, state-wise programs that are pushing to meet their actual targets, which are all very ambitious, as we've discussed. And we don't necessarily have currently the capacity or the institutions, even though they are available in the ways that they are necessary to address this issue. And the other thing we talked about is in terms of equity, we should be trying to increase the number of voices that are speaking at a decision-making level. We should be funding more MSME level entrepreneurship to encourage localized green project work. And then finally, I think to wrap the whole conversation up, I would say that we have all the potential and we have all the people required, but we have to somehow revamp our systems to ensure that in the next 5-10 years, we don't either have to outsource all these jobs or grossly fall short of our targets, which are very, very ambitious. So I think if the ambitions are in the right place, then we need to work a lot faster, is what I've gotten from this conversation. But feel free to correct me. And for those of you who are looking to rewatch this conversation, we will be posting it so you can come back to it. And Rishali and I will also be writing about it in the future, a summarized version, so you can catch that there. Thank you both again for coming to speak with us. And yeah, we are looking forward to doing more talking about transitions dialogues in the new year.